Hi everyone, my name is Moni.
And I'm Naveen from Before You Play.
And today we are going to be discussing our thoughts on the newest Stonemaier release called Red Rising.
This is actually a dual design game, Jamey Stegmaier and Alexander Schmidt. It's published by Stonemaier Games, like Monique said. It's a 1 to 6 player game, and so we did a playthrough on our channel a couple days ago. If you're interested in that, you can always check out the link right over here. But if you want to know our thoughts, we're going to talk about it today.
And so if you're not familiar with this game at all, this game is based off of a series of books of the same name by Pierce Brown.
I believe there's 5 books total.
Currently, yeah. I think he's still in the process of writing more.
Okay.
This game specifically is based off of the original trilogy, the first 3 books. And without giving much away, the story is based off of this kind of alternate futuristic society in space that is based off of a caste system comprised of colors.
Yeah, so when you're born into a certain class of people and you're designated a certain color, and depending on that, that's kind of your profession and kind of the life you're going to lead.
And that's all we're going to say about that.
That's all we're going to say, yeah.
And so we'd first like to thank everybody who submitted questions on our original playthrough video as well as via Instagram. We're going to do our best to incorporate all those questions here in our video today. But first, we do want to begin by discussing the solo mode in this game, because that is something that we did not touch upon at all during our playthrough. We are going to include timestamps down below in case you would like to skip around to the different sections and skip this section entirely. And so the general gist of the way that the solo mode works is you are going to be competing against an automa by the name of Tall Automa. And so if you're familiar with the Red Rising series, then you're gonna
get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's supposed to simulate a 2-player game, sort of. The automa is gonna have this deck. And these cards are going to dictate the decision making for the automa. When you set up the board, you're going to randomly distribute the 4 priority cards that are labeled A, B, C, and D into the 4 different locations on the board. During the automa's turn, they're going to draw and resolve 2 of these cards, one at a time. The card is going to dictate where the automa is going to deploy a card to and where they're going to gain a card from. The automa also does not activate any deploy abilities. So this is strictly for the hand management aspect.
For maneuvering cards around. Yeah.
So if there's a star, then they're going to also be able to gain the bonus from the location where they picked up a card. And if there's an X, then it'll allow them to banish the top card from the deck. And so essentially the automa is taking 2 actions per turn. And that is essentially how the solo mode works. There are a lot of little rules here and there, especially for setup, but that is pretty much how it works. And so neither of us have played the solo mode, so we can't really speak on how much we enjoy it.
Yeah.
But we hope that's helpful. And so before we deep dive, we do want to preface by saying that I have read the books.
Yes.
And Naveen has not.
So she's read the first 3 books.
Yes.
I have read none. So
yeah, he's read none. He's heard me listening to them.
We can talk about it from both different perspectives.
And we have both played Fantasy Realms, which is a filler type game that this game is heavily based upon.
Very much so, yeah.
I am a fan of Fantasy Realms, and Naveen is absolutely not.
Not a fan of Fantasy Realms, yes.
So take that into consideration when listening to the rest of this review. So starting with theme.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on theme? Well, somebody who's never read the books.
I've listened to the audiobooks and snippets because you've been listening to the audiobooks, so I've heard some of these names. So it was, for me, seeing some of these cards and these characters, it was cool to be like, oh, I've heard that in the audiobook. So I can see how somebody who's into these books
really excited
would be really excited about what they heard and what they see here. So I don't know too much about the theme other than the dystopian kind of society. So for me, it's something that's very interesting, but I don't know how much it shows off in the actual gameplay.
I love the books. If you have not read the books, they're not perfect, right? But they are so riveting. They just after you get to a certain point in the first book, it just fish hooks you in and you can't put it down. The application of the theme in this game is very loose. It's very loose. To me, this is in no way the Red Rising game. You're not furthering the plot, of this story in this game.
Yeah.
The only similarity is names and titles of resources, and the way that the characters synergize, that makes sense. The characters who dislike each other are going to not work together in your hand. The golds are going to be a lot more aggressive, in terms of their abilities, their deploy abilities, and in terms of the way that they score.
Or their native victory points. Yeah.
So I do like that. The character integration makes sense, and I do really like that. It is a ton of fun seeing the characters that you know and love or hate from the stories in this game, and characters that you've never seen before that they probably had to kind of come up with that made thematic sense for the different colors, because it's not like every single character in this game is going to be one of the main characters of the story, right? So I thought that was really cool. And so I think Naveen can attest to the fact that you don't need to have read the books in order to appreciate the game.
Yeah, exactly. Next, we have the components. So there are 2 editions of the game. There is the collector's edition, which is what we used in the playthrough, and of course the retail edition. Now, we have not seen or felt or touched the retail edition, but we can speak on the collector's edition, which is going to be available through the website.
And so we know that the differences are, in the collector's edition, there's a lot of metal components.
Yes.
Essentially, all of the player pieces are metal. It's all the influence cubes. The game also includes these stands that you can use to prop up all your cards. There's an insert, and then there's gold foiling on the box as well as on the gold cards.
Yep.
The collector's edition is really nice.
It is nice, yeah.
The quality of the components are really nice. The only thing is some of the metal cubes are difficult to differentiate in color.
Yeah, there's like a red and like a pinkish one that are kind of tough to see.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be red and purple.
Yeah.
And those are tough to see. The yellow and gold is like really tough to see.
Yes.
The card stands are nice, especially in terms of accessibility. We didn't play with them because sitting side by side in a 2-player is, you can kind of see your opponent's cards.
Yeah.
So we didn't play with them, but they're a nice touch. And the gold foiling actually is super nice.
Yeah.
So I think that is my favorite part about the collector's edition. It's that gold foiling specifically on the gold cards.
Yeah.
If we didn't have the collector's edition, I don't know that that would necessarily sell me on it, especially because we are not aware of the price differences.
Right.
We're not told about that up front. So just keep that in mind. I think they did a really nice job illustrating the cards. It's all very cartoony. It's not necessarily what I would imagine when reading the books.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's like a more serious story.
You picture more of a human form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see an artistic rendering of the characters that I know and love from the stories. So I still really appreciate all the artwork on the cards. Now moving on to player count and replayability. Obviously, we played the 2-player version in our playthrough, and that it does have specific 2-player rules. Actually, the only difference is that you start with the 3 influence cubes of a neutral player at the Institute.
Yep.
That's the only difference in a 2-player game. We also played the game at 3, actually, because we happened to be upon a circumstance where we were housing a family member, and so we decided to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah, force them to play.
Yeah. What did you think between the 2?
I like it better at a higher player count. I am interested in seeing what it would be like at 4. I think at 2 it plays okay, but there's a stack of 112 cards, and you're only going to have access to so many cards because we only have so many hands in play. At 3, there was definitely more flow of cards, so I'm interested to see what 4 has to bring, where there's a lot more cards out there. And there's more influence in changing on the game state. Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that at higher player counts, the game is going to be much more interesting. It is definitely going to be longer.
Yes.
I don't know that it's going to be like a super long game. It really just depends on the players that you have around the table. A 2-player game is pretty quick. It's like 25, especially if we both know the game and we're just kind of in and out of it. 25 minutes.
Because it's basic, play a card, pick up a card.
The turn structure is very simple and straightforward, and it can be very quick. But yes, the topic of cards not circulating as much in a 2-player game is definitely...
It's real.
Yeah, it can definitely be an issue. Our playthrough had a lot of that, especially because we were banishing cards a lot in the beginning of the game, and not every game is like that. That's actually the playthrough that we put out is actually the first game where we had to banish that many cards.
I don't think we ever played where we had more than 5 cards banished, and I think in that playthrough we had 8, maybe 9.
And we'd banished them early. And so because of that, we were definitely just shuffling the same cards, kind of
just maneuvering things around. And
so the first time we played it at 2, I definitely felt frustrated by that. But then I remembered that this game is actually based off of Fantasy Realms, which is a filler that has very, very similar mechanics. You're doing the same kind of card
optimization,
curating of cards, and you're also discarding cards for other people to pick up. That game is a filler type game that ends once there are 10 or 11 cards on the table.
There's a certain amount of cards in the row. Yes.
And so because of that, it's very similar in that you don't go through the entire deck. Fantasy Realms has a large deck that you're only going to see a portion of the cards. The main difference, though, is that is a filler, and this is a more standard.
I'd say a super
medium
filler
or a light medium.
It's
a light game.
Yeah.
And so maybe that was part of the intent. For me, higher player counts are probably better, but the 2-player game is fine.
Right. It does play up to 6. I don't know. I don't know what it's like at 6.
The 6-player game is probably going to be long.
Yes.
I would imagine 4 players is probably the sweet spot.
Probably, yeah. So just briefly talking about replayability, there are 112 cards that I think are all unique.
Yes.
I don't think there's the same characters over and over. So there's a lot of different combinations. I think there's 14 different factions. So It's an optimization game, so there's a lot of replayability in the sense that you are going to try to find your way to synergize your cards, to collect your resources, and try to outscore your opponent.
Every game feels different. Or every game has felt different so far.
Yeah.
The house tiles are also asymmetric, and they are a little bit unbalanced, which is something that I know other people have asked.
Sure, yeah.
In our opinion, they're slightly unbalanced.
You were Mars, and every time you took the, what's that thing called?
The sovereign token.
The sovereign token, you gained a helium, which is getting you towards one of those endgame triggers. Well, every helium at the end of the game is worth 3. Mine was Jupiter, which I get to go up the track.
The fleet track.
The fleet track. And the fleet track, every time I go up, was greater than 3 for the most part. So...
And it's not just that. There are other houses that let you do other things. And they all have to do with what happens when you take the sovereign token.
Yep.
There's one when you take the sovereign token, you roll the rising die. There's another one that lets you put influence cubes in the institute, and that is very powerful.
If you can put it out, then it's 4 per versus Mars is 3 per. Yeah.
Apollo, who lets you start and end the game.
You get the last turn.
And getting the last turn in this game is pretty powerful because you can pretty much just take the sovereign token. It's going to be an additional 10 points and whatever your house card gives you.
Right.
I wouldn't say that they break the game.
No.
But it's definitely there.
No, because you're trying to optimize the cards. If you're worried about, 2 helium versus 2 up on the track, that's not where it's at.
Yeah, and I think that is the biggest thing, that your main focus is your hand of cards and trying to synergize them. That is where you're going to score your points.
Yep.
And lastly, the mechanics. So, you don't like Fantasy Realms.
I'm not a fan of Fantasy Realms, no. I find that game frustrating.
Why?
All my plays in Fantasy Realms, I would always find a card that's like, have this, but make sure you don't have this. And then this card's like, have this, but make sure you don't have this. And then they all kind of just cancel each other out. At least, maybe I'm just not doing it right. I will say, though, in this game, this is more board gamey, where, you're trying to focus on tracks and put out your cubes.
Yeah, it's
and
more board gamey.
and also get some that helium. And because you have the 4 different locations and that influences how you kind of maneuver your cards, I will say I do like the overall mechanics of this game better than Fantasy Realms.
Interesting. Yeah. So for me, the reason why I like Fantasy Realms is because it is very fast and there's a lot that you can think about, while you're kind of playing that game. So Red Rising takes that concept but makes it longer, and it makes the card curating not as extreme. So that is something that I liked about Fantasy Realms, the fact that you have all these cards that are like, if you have this card, it's going to blank all these other cards, which means you won't score points at all for these cards.
I think that's the part of Fantasy Realms that kind of gets me, is like but
extreme.
I just worked so hard, and now this card is going to undo all that. So,
so you don't actually see a whole lot of that in this game. This game is a lot milder in terms of that. I feel like the designers probably balanced each card to have like a cap. Each card will pretty much score you anywhere from like 30 to 40 points on average. 40 points is high.
If you're successful in meeting the criteria on the card.
Yes. Some cards will give you a higher potential roof. So it'll say stuff like 5 points for each brown card or something like that. And so obviously the more cards you have of that color, the higher your roof will be. But the core value will also be lower. So I feel like that would still average out to like maybe 30, 40 points. So it's not as extreme.
Right.
And that hand curating part of this game and Fantasy Realms is my favorite part of it. So the resources I actually don't really care too much about. And it's such a big deal, in the game. Like, you need to get resources because it's going to be the way that the game ends. And it's also just going to get you a lot more points if you're able to make them work towards your strategy.
You can't ignore them.
You can't ignore them. But it's also the part of it that makes it more gamey, like you said. Yep. And I know we've talked an awful lot about this game called Fantasy Realms that a lot of you out there may not be familiar with. And so if you're not familiar with that game, the reason why I enjoy that same kind of hand mechanism that's in both of the games is because it causes you to constantly strategize on the fly. So you're going to start the game with a hand of 5 or 6 cards that are not necessarily going to synergize well with each other.
No, probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And so as the game kind of progresses, it's going to force you to constantly reimagine your strategy.
There's a lot of the grass is greener on the other side kind of stuff. You see like a new card come out and you're like, ooh, maybe I'll go in that direction now. and you have the potential to ruin 3 other cards in your hand just to do it. But that's kind of that strategizing on the fly.
And that's a thing that I actually like about this game specifically. It's the deployabilities. It's not just about how is this card going to benefit my hand at the end of the game, but maybe I want that card because of its deployability.
Yeah, because it could manipulate all these other things.
Yeah, I can pick up that card with the deployability. I'm going to put it here. It's a big puzzle, and you're constantly trying to figure it out until suddenly the game ends.
Suddenly, yeah.
And then now you're kind of just stuck with what you have. I think the difficulty in forming a strategy comes when you have your hand of cards and a new card comes out that you think, oh wow, that's going to work really well with this card, but not with this one. So which one am I going to get rid of? And which strategy am I going to play towards more, right?
That is the essence of the game.
That's the essence of the game. Another question asked if we think that the 10 points for the sovereign token at the end of the game is a bit much, especially since it's very easy to get it if you're the last player. I think yes.
Yeah, I think so.
I feel like there really is not a whole lot of reason to not take the sovereign token if you are going last, and first player does not change hands. So you start the game as last player, you're going to end the game.
Unless you're Apollo, then you get the 1 extra turn.
Right.
But then Apollo can just take it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unless you see an opportunity that's going to score you more than 10 points plus the whatever your benefit is for acquiring the sovereign token, then you're always going to take the sovereign token, in my opinion.
Yep. A
big question was in regards to player interaction. What are your thoughts on the level of player interaction in this game?
So the only true player interaction, I think, is there is some cards that allow you to banish cards from other people's hands. Monique did that to me in the game. It is not too interactive in the sense that like it's take thatty, but there's of course, anytime there's a menu of cards that can be taken, you're waiting and like biting your nails, hoping that somebody doesn't cover up the card that you want or take the card that you want. So the interaction's kind of there where you're kind of jockeying for position, vying for cards. But there's no direct interaction.
There are some cards, like the Reporter, I think it was called, that we played with in our playthrough, where the deployability says if you have more helium than your player to your left, then you give that card to them and you get to do something. So there are some cards in the deck that are like that. And so other than that, then it's also just going to be about who has the most influence tokens in the Institute. And I think that is probably why they chose to score the Institute that way, so that people would compete in that area.
Yeah, exactly, yep.
The score sheet isn't like fantastic because it doesn't necessarily put out different areas for you to write down the points of each card.
Yeah.
Right? So you definitely need like a calculator every time you do this. But the cards are actually not that difficult to calculate once you lay out the hand. It's not like in Fantasy Realms where it's like, oh gosh, I have to look at all the wizards and oh, do I have weather, right? It's
Where
only
it affects multiple variables, yeah.
It's a lot less complicated than that.
It's more streamlined.
And finally, what are your final thoughts in terms of the game? Would you replay it again? How does it make you feel? And how do you feel about it compared to Fantasy Realms?
Okay, so would I play it again? Yes. I do want to try playing it at higher player counts than the max that we've played so far. I do want to try this at 4 players eventually. In terms of its comparison to Fantasy Realms, I definitely like this one a lot better, 100%. It is overall, it's a good game. When I did first hear about Red Rising, I thought it was going to be like this arena battle kind of game. So the theme and the mechanics definitely did not meet what I thought was going to be because it was very cryptic and we didn't know much about it. But overall, for a game where you're trying to optimize your hand, it's pretty quick in and out, 30 minutes roughly. So yeah, it's a pretty decent game.
I would agree. I like it. I think it's fun. It's not like amazing, right? But it's fun, especially for its weight and its size and how quickly you're going to get in and out of it, especially at 2. I don't know that I necessarily like it more than Fantasy Realms, but I have a good time when I'm playing it. Looking through the cards and really trying to figure out the thought process. I don't feel bored at all like when I'm playing it because I'm constantly trying to weigh my options and figuring out which cards to ditch and which ones to pick up.
Yeah, so it's weird. When you're in it, you're really into it.
Yeah, when you're in it, you're constantly strategizing. And that is what I really like about the game. And so throw a theme that I really care about on top of those mechanics and I have a good time. So anyway, those are our thoughts on Red Rising. If you have any further questions regarding how we feel about the game or any rules clarifications, anything at all, please feel free to leave a question down below in the comment section and we'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Well, thank you all so much for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have not seen the playthrough, we'll leave a link right over here so you guys can check out all the stuff that we've been talking about and referring to. In the future, if you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.